Got it. Reporting in progress. Okay.
All right. So, Nai, do you know how to start letting people, or Mary, do you want to start letting people in? If you're familiar with
I'll
that.
admit everybody.
Perfect. And then as people start coming in, just let them in again.
Hello, Professor, Assistant Professor Tik Savani. Okay. Okay, I think it's time for our session to start. Shall we go ahead, Elizabeth? Or should we wait a little bit more?
Yes, I think that works.
Yes. Okay. How many people now? Let's see. Okay, hi, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have almost 50 people from Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand to join the Defending Digital Privacy virtual seminar series. My name is Jum Supaporn Darak, a director of the Human Rights Lawyers Association, HRLA. We are very excited to be part of this program. We collaborate with the American Bar Association, Rule of Law Initiative, ABA Raleigh. HRLA will provide virtual seminars for our Defending Digital Privacy networks in Southeast Asia. Stay tuned for monthly virtual seminars. We will keep you posted. And thank you for many of you who emailed us lovely feedback. If you want to be a speaker or recommend a speaker to us relevant to digital privacy, please contact us directly. We aim to do 1 hour session only to make it easy for everyone to participate. And also we aim to do it like during lunch or in the evening to make sure that you all lawyer can participate. So in October, we will have David Husband, October 20, 7 p.m. Bangkok time, we will have David Husband. He is a cybersecurity and privacy attorney for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So he will present the issue of digital privacy from a government policy perspective. And in November 29, 8 p.m. Bangkok, Dr. Benjamin Fang, he is a Canadian research chair in data mining for cybersecurity, a full professor of the School of Information Studies at McGill University, Canada. He will present on technical aspect of online privacy. So our team will post the registration of October and November event in the chat box. You can find the registration link. And today, and also we will inform you the next coming event in September. We are working on it. We will email you guys, and also we will have the information on our website, HRLA website. And today we are very excited to host the first seminar on how to create a successful online event. I'm looking forward to learning from Elizabeth myself. Please send your questions and comments in the chat box. We will be very happy to answer those questions. And today I will have Assistant Professor Tik Savani Keo Julakan. She is a Vice Chairperson of HRLA, and she will be a moderator of this session today. Tik.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
As the Vice President of Human Rights Lawyer Association, I truly delight to be part. Can you hear my voice? Hello? Hello?
The connection is not that super clear. Okay, can you say again, please?
Can you hear my voice now?
Okay.
Hello?
Okay, go ahead. Okay, great.
Okay. Sure, sorry. Yeah. Hello, everyone. As the president of Human Rights Lawyer Associations, I'm truly delighted to be part of this workshop, focusing on the topic of how to create a successful online event. So today we are privileged to welcome Elizabeth, the program directors for East Asia at the American Bar Association as our esteemed speakers for today. As Kun Jum said, today we are so excited and we would like to learn from you. Okay.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. There we are. And I'm very excited to be helping HRLA kick off this seminar series. A lot of you, I think, are very familiar with the Defending Digital Privacy program, having taken some or hopefully all of the right to privacy training modules. This is sort of the next phase of this project, is now trying to provide technical support on whatever issues you as lawyers and advocates on privacy need in your endeavors to promote digital privacy regulations in your own jurisdictions. Several of you online did participate in the, I'm sorry, if everyone could just put their microphones on mute, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. But in June, we held a symposium in Bangkok. And several people did participate in person, and we also had people participate in some of the sessions virtually. And it was requested amongst all of those individuals that a training on conducting virtual events would be really helpful, not only in doing advocacy related to digital privacy, but I think sort of in all of our work. Just a little bit of background about myself. I oversee several programs at the American Bar Association Center for Global Programs. Previous to joining ABA, was with another organization where I had been conducting virtual and hybrid training and other events several years before COVID hit. And so when the pandemic hit, I was actually charged with training my entire previous organization, several hundred people, in relatively short order on how to use virtual platforms to have engaging events, and how to still use them to facilitate collaboration and coordination, so it can be done. Now, you'll see on your screen before we get started just a few rules of engagement that will help us move forward in a productive manner. As I've already mentioned, please mute your microphone if you're not speaking to prevent feedback. Also, this session is being recorded, so if you don't want your voice or the voice of, say, your cat in the background to be heard, please do make sure you're on mute. We really do want to encourage you, if you have a question or a response to a question, or even just some thoughts or reflections, to put them in the chat. This is one of the benefits of hosting virtual events, is you can have multiple streams of information and engagement. So please utilize that. Love to read your thoughts in the chat as we're moving along. We don't, because this is a meeting format, have a Q&A session, or Q&A box, so I just put everything in the chat. We're also asking that you not take screenshots. This event is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the ABA's learning platform for the Defending Digital Privacy program, and I believe HRLA will also be making it available on their website, and we will be sending the PowerPoint presentation directly to everyone who registered. Before we move on, A, I'm great to see some people introducing themselves in the chat, but B, if there's anything else you think would help make this a better and more engaging event that would make you feel safer to speak, please do share your thoughts in the chat. Now, one of the things I'm going to do, is one of the techniques that I have, is I have asked you to do something and to think about something and provide a response. And what I usually do is I wait for about until I feel really uncomfortable that no one has responded to my question. And then I count to 10 in my head. And usually someone will respond or raise their hand. Sometimes I do it quietly, but since we're just starting off, I don't want to have dead static just yet, because then everyone will be uncomfortable and probably sign off. Well, I don't see anything else popping up in the chat, so I will assume that these rules work for everybody. And with that, we are now going to move on to our first icebreaker. Now, what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be sharing a poll with all of you. And I would like you to answer the 2 questions. So this is one of the strategies that you can have, and one of the tools that a lot of the platforms provide to get people engaged and to really track and see if people are paying attention to what you're doing, or if they just have it on in the background while they're doing laundry or writing a brief. If you do not see the poll popping up on your screen, please do let us know. There's 2 questions, and they're asking you to rate the benefits of virtual events and also to rate or to the drawbacks of virtual events. I so far see that no one has been able to answer these questions in the poll. I don't know. Oh, there we are. We have one person has been able to answer. So what I'm doing right now, again, is I'm sort of vamping to do this icebreaker. But icebreakers are really important for virtual events if what you're trying to do is foster a sense of collaboration or get people to feel comfortable sharing. These are relatively low questions. So actually they can be used as a way to set a baseline if you're trying to train people on a certain topic. But really, as you'll see throughout today's session, what I want to do is make sure you're using all of the tools that are out there for you to have successful events. Now we have only had 2 people fill out the icebreaker. Hopefully that doesn't mean only 2 people are listening, but in any event, I'm going to close it. And what you should see now is the results of what people think are some of the good reasons to have virtual events, but then also sort of what are some of the drawbacks that you need to be thinking about. And now the purpose of today's session is to start thinking more about how do we emphasize the benefits and minimize the drawbacks. So with that in mind, the first sort of step in all of that is to determine the purpose of why you're holding this virtual event. So the purpose of your event and the outcomes you want or you need to achieve really do play a critical factor in how you're going to structure your virtual event. So it's really important that you begin with being clear about what the purpose of your event is. Is it to share information? If it is it a training or is it general awareness raising? Or are you really more focused on fostering partnerships with people and groups that you might be able to collaborate with in the future? Or are you a membership-based organization? And are you trying to build up your member base by demonstrating your expertise? Now, it's likely that your purpose is going to be a combination of several of these elements, and that's fine. But it's really important to define that at the outset. Because if you don't know what you want to get out of an event, you're likely not going to get it, and you're also not going to give people what they want. So at this stage, in addition to determining what your purpose is, it's also really important to consider what your event will not be, and also be upfront with participants about that. So, one of the key things I like to talk about is being very intentional when you're creating and designing and implementing your virtual events. And one key element of that is setting clear expectations for your participants. And then meeting those expectations. So people really do feel like they're getting something out of this virtual event you're providing with them or providing for them. So, if you want to provide a training on a specific skill, you may not want to have people sharing their deeply personal experiences, even if it is related to that skill. For this session today, our purpose is to provide both training on a skill that people had asked about, but also to introduce you to this platform as a means for collaboration and sort of launching this ongoing seminar where you can be learning and sharing your expertise with the network that HRLA will be helping build. And that's really why we want you to be engaging in the chat during this session, sharing your experiences so you can start to get to know one another. We'll also be asking questions both in the chat and in other ways to try to help get you connecting on that level. So the next factor to consider after you've determined what your purpose is who your audience is and what benefits they're going to gain from participating in your online event. So really, the first question you want to ask yourself is, who do you need to reach to achieve the purpose that you just defined? So if you're raising awareness or you're building a community around an issue, your audience is going to be very different than if you're trying to get a piece of policy or law reform passed. And depending on the purpose of your online event, the size of your audience might also differ. But because of the nature of online events, they're difficult. It can be harder to encourage people to engage. Even if your goal is awareness raising on a very nuanced issue, blasting to a large audience, so including everyone from those central key characters all the way out to the periphery of people who may or may not care about these issues, might not be the best idea. What you might want to consider is holding a series of smaller events where people can still be engaging on the issue and engaging with you on a more personal level, which will give them a greater sense of empowerment to then share that information or invite others to the ongoing series of events that you'll be hosting. Now, for those of you who were able to attend the symposium in June, we did spend quite a bit of time on what we called stakeholder mapping. So this is a really helpful tool and exercise to help you identify the people who already support the work that you are doing, so they're allies and they can help you. You also can identify people whose help you will need in the future, but you might need to spend more time convincing them. Are those the people that you want to be targeting in your virtual event? Stakeholder mapping is also really helpful for identifying people whose support you're just never going to get or who could be spoilers. And so either not focusing on them at all or wanting to target your virtual event for them, or being careful that perhaps they may spoil your event and keeping that in the back of your mind. So, you want to think about people in terms of who it is that you need at this event to help you achieve your purpose. But I also, as I was indicating before, find it really helpful to think about, for virtual events, in these concentric circles. Who's really at the core of who you need to talk to about this issue? And then branching your way out and considering, all right, well, what do we need to get out of this event? And how many people will be that optimum amount? Like maybe we'll stop at only inviting people who are the core because we really want them to be engaged and we really want them to have this sense of personal empowerment. Or maybe we'll expand it a little bit more. It'll be a virtual event that's a little bit harder to moderate, but we'll have a larger audience of people who really care about this. But it's really important to have a clear understanding of what you want to do and then identifying who it is that you should be inviting to the table. Or no, I guess not to the table, to the platform. And on that sort of note, there are just so many different ways that you can structure virtual events. But I am personally a huge fan of hybrid events. I mentioned before, I have been doing virtual events and hybrid events since well before the pandemic, and they have been an invaluable resource for me in reaching people who are unable to travel, in being able to expand programming reach, to reach more people because I have a small budget, or to bring in content from different regions by inviting speakers who would not be able to travel to these events. That being said, hybrid events are extremely a lot of work because you have to put in all the work for a virtual event as well as an in-person event. But in the end, for me, in most cases, for the purposes that I host events, I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. So I've listed on the screen here a few of the top types of hybrid events that I have used in the past or participated in that have been very successful. I would really love it if you were able to share in the chat other types of hybrid virtual events that you have participated in, or fully virtual events. When I'm talking about hybrid, that means part of an event is in person and part of the event is available online. So just kind of starting from the top, if you're working from your primary event being an in-person event, a couple things you might want to consider is having some of the sessions be available online, either live streamed or recorded and then uploaded later. As I mentioned before, this is a great way to help you expand the number of people who can access the information that you're sharing. So if you're trying to do awareness raising and reach a lot of people, this is one way you might want to structure your virtual / in-person event. The one sort of drawback on this front is that when you have a mixture of people participating in person and then people just dropping in occasionally on sessions, it's really hard to foster connections between those two groups. So if you're trying to foster connections, you're going to have to think really meticulously about how you want to integrate those individuals who are signing in to different program activities. So whether it's structuring more breakout sessions or sort of pairing them with other individuals who are there in person to be sharing information or doing consultations or one-on-one discussions. You can think creatively about that. Another option that I've alluded to already is to have your trainers or presenters call in to your in-person events. So I have done this in the past in my closed society programming, where it was essentially impossible for speakers to obtain visas to go to the country and share their experiences from other jurisdictions in conducting advocacy. And when I was able to do this on multiple occasions, those sessions were always rated the highest by participants in terms of their feedback, because they were gaining access to information that and gaining that sort of connection with someone that they otherwise never would have been able to do because of visa restrictions. Now, for those of you who participated in the June symposium, you'll see that we utilize both of these options to varying degrees of success, especially related to tech issues in the first remote session. But in any event, I'll move on. Sort of a related event, hybrid event, is what I like to call the hub model. I have run these in multiple occasions. They're a lot of work, and I've participated in them. And when they're done well, they work phenomenally. This is essentially where you have multiple different groups of people meeting in separate geographical locations at the same time. So for example, if you have a large country, I'm from Canada. So, if you have people in Ontario meeting up in Toronto and people in British Columbia meeting up in Vancouver and then calling into the same platform, then they listen to the same speakers. Those speakers could be remoting in. They could be based in one or either of the different hub locations. Then the hubs will go offline to do a series of in-person exercises together, and then they do group sharing virtually. As you can tell, this takes a lot of work. It requires a really good facilitator to be based in each of the different hub locations, who's well versed in the purpose of the program, who's in the room, and what you want to get out of it. But if you can get that person in the room, you can design your activities really well. It can be a wonderful mix of virtual, sharing across borders for people who may never meet, while still maintaining that in-person connection for the people who are based in the hub location. So with that, just a few final things that you'll need to consider when you're doing a virtual event are things like access. So here we're talking not only about, do your communities have access to the internet, but what's the bandwidth like? If bandwidth is low, how is that going to impact the type of content that can be shared? And how will that type of impact on content affect your goal? And how are you going to make workarounds? So I ran a multi-country panel discussion one time where the bandwidth allowance in the different locations varied greatly. So what we did was we had all of the panelists record their introductory remarks. We played the recordings first, and then we opened it up for a Q&A with the audience. We still ran into some issues with the bandwidth, so would probably do better with integrating YouTube. But what was really a cool benefit of that was all of the panelists got to see one another's recorded remarks in advance and were able to actually prepare initial responses. So sometimes when you do a virtual event, you can actually enhance and improve the content you're providing. But also when you're thinking about accessibility, you don't just want to think about the internet and the technology, but also how accessible the content is to different communities, such as people with hearing or visual difficulties. I'm really happy to see more instances of simultaneous sign language in some virtual events, but often the bandwidth in many places isn't good enough for simultaneous translation because the video content, video quality isn't good enough to see the sign language. So again, this is an opportunity when recording in advance might be more appropriate. Another thing you want to think about is how people who are visually impaired are going to be able to engage in the chat or send questions or comments, whether it's through a separate channel or what have you. A final consideration that I know a lot of people have is this, level of engagement and the interaction of the group overall. In general, if you have a vibrant group that knows each other and is already having conversations a lot in person, taking these conversations online can be really simple, and you can have a flat line of interaction that continues from both offline to online. But communities who are not used to sharing or who don't have regular interaction with each other are going to need to get to know one another before they are really probably going to start interacting. So you need to be very intentional in thinking about what activities you can integrate into your events, whether it's questions or sharing in the chat or breakout sessions, or breaking it up into a series of events so people can start seeing one another and getting used to each other. Because really, as we'll talk about, trust and engagement are really in the offline world or in the real world is typically achieved through sustained interactions. And so to do that online, you have to be very intentional. Another aspect that you do need to think about is security, which we'll get to in a bit. But just to stick with this issue of interaction, which is a pretty sticky point for a lot of people, so we're just going to stick with that for a little bit longer. The first thing is I'd like to start off by mentioning that it really is possible to establish connections through virtual events. In fact, as I've been sort of noting, I think virtual events can really help us expand the connections and sustain them better than previously when we would hold expensive one-off events that required people to travel to a singular location. First and foremost, as you can see on your screen, most of the platforms offer a range of built-in apps and features that are designed to help you foster connections and interactions. And as you can see now, and I was really happy as I was updating this chart for this training, that most of the platforms now offer all of these features. Previously, before the pandemic, it was really only Zoom that offered all of these features. And then shortly after the pandemic started, a handful of them offered all of the features. But now, as you can see, every single one of the main apps that are used sort of in North America and in Asia, there's a few from Asia I think that might be missing. And if you see a glaring absence, please do put it in the chat so I can update this chart. But really, there are a lot of features you can already use, like the poll that I unsuccessfully used previously and only 2 people filled out in the chat. But breakout sessions are also a really great feature to be able to encourage people to start talking. These features are really not difficult to employ. There's a lot of how-to videos on Google, but even if you go to Zoom's, you sign into your Zoom account, they have a lot of tutorials right up there on your home screen. But really, as you can see, the most important thing is to first know what your goal is so you can select the right platform and the right features that you want. So for example, if your biggest concern is about security, then Jitsi is probably, which is the one at the end, is likely your best bet. But as you can see, it doesn't offer all of the same features that the rest of the platforms do. But really, if you want to do a lot of interactions, but you're working with a community that's not very familiar with online events or tools, you're going to want to select the platform that has the easiest UX, the easiest user experience. And so really sort of take the time to look at these different platforms and see which ones would be the best for the communities that you're already working. So with that in mind, sort of understanding the platforms and who you want to be working with. Oh dear. well, I gave it away. So hopefully people weren't paying attention, or maybe this will be a test. But as we're sort of building towards, selecting your platform, once you have your platform selected and you have the people that you're inviting, you have to remember that you as the moderator of the event are responsible for creating a culture for your virtual event and for the community that you're trying to create. Now, there is a key to doing this, and I'd love it if you could type in the chat, is how would you finish this sentence, sort of based on what I've been saying? What do you have to be when you're trying to build virtual relationships? Does anyone want to try typing in the chat? Now, this is where I will go silent and see what happens. We've got one in here that says international. Needs to be global. Well, thank you, Chan Chi Tong. Oh, Liz is saying strategic. You need to be strategic. What else do we have here? Intentional. All right, so Sarah, I know you're always paying attention and taking notes, so you probably saw it. Oh, considerate, Lenny. I really do like that one too. And I think that really speaks to a lot of what we're going to talk about. But you really want to be intentional about everything that you're doing online. You can't just host an event and hope that people will act the way that you want them to. You want to make it easy and give them multiple opportunities to connect, whether it's through polls or through the chat or sharing through breakout sessions. You also want to be, as sort of Lenny, oh, you didn't see it, Sarah, great. Well, but as Lenny mentioned, you want to be considerate. You want to think about your audience and whether or not people will be able to come and attend a virtual event and connect, or do you need to record and make it available on demand? You need to be thinking about all of these different things. So now for us, we're trying to reach as many people as possible and provide as many channels as possible for people to connect. So, HRLA is going to be hosting a series of these events. And if you can't make it to one, that's okay, but please make it to the ones that you can, and feel free to share in the chat. And you also want to, a part of intentionality is having a lot of people on the back end helping things out. People that you don't see. So we have several people on the back end here who are providing tech support to those who are having trouble with their technology. We have people who are sharing links in the chat, so I don't necessarily have to be following through with that. Thinking about all of this before you move on is really critical. So to be intentional, you have to have a very clear idea of what it is you want to achieve from your event and the type of relationship outcome that you want to have. Is this going to just be a one-off event because you want to blast out information and you're not going to have any follow-up for participants? If it is, having engagement's probably not something that you'll focus on, and maybe you'll just do it sort of a YouTube blast. But if you're trying to build a community where people are going to be engaging with you after the event, or more importantly with each other, it's really important to start at the beginning with building a culture that inspires that level of engagement. So to do this, you want to find ways where people can feel a connection. You can spotlight the work of others, or you can have them share experiences. Another thing that you need to think about is, when you're in person, there are certain social norms that govern how we act. We get visual cues and audio cues to know that, what we're saying is on the right track, or more importantly, when what we're doing is not on the right track. And this really is much harder in virtual events, even if people have their video on. So a really good starting point for setting the tone and the culture of your virtual event is to have really clear, rules of engagement, how people are going to interact with each other. You see this in every social media platform. Their standards, their community standards. As you saw at the beginning, call these our rules of engagement. It's setting expectations of how people can engage with each other and how they cannot. This degree of certainty can really help make people feel more comfortable in the absence of our normal social cues. So one sort of tactic that I recently came across are called community agreements. These are basically the rules of engagement that are established through consensus. So the participants all come together and mutually decide how they're going to engage with one another. And if you have time, it can be a really powerful strategy for coalescing a group into a team. And in particular, because it's a consensus-driven tool, it's actually the process of constructing the agreement that is more important than the actual end product. And so I would love to hear now, sort of having gone through a little bit more of these screens, what you might have added to that initial rules of engagement that I had shared at the beginning of today's session. So please, if there are other things you think that would make you feel more comfortable chatting or engaging or learning, please put them here in the chat. But just to go back to the slide that we were at before, I was recently at a conference on restorative justice where one of the panel sessions began with the lead panelist reading out these here at the bottom 3 different rules of engagement for observing and attending this panel, because we had to expect and presume welcome, turn judgment into curiosity, and expect and accept non-closure. And at the end of him reading out this community agreement, we all had to all of us in the audience had to affirm that we agreed to these rules for engagement. And then the panel went on, and I found myself actually starting to judge people in the room. And I went back and I remembered this agreement we had at the beginning, and actually made me change the way that I was thinking. Just that one simple act of having me affirm that this was the community agreement, it was really quite powerful. So even if you don't have time for the whole consensus-driven process of a community agreement, it is something worth thinking about if that is one of the goals of your program. So this brings us to sort of the next component of building a virtual community is trust. Trust is at the bedrock of having a successful virtual community. And there really are different types of trust. Like, you rely on your coworkers to do the work that you agree to with them. You might trust your significant other or your best friend to listen to your personal problems, but maybe not to be honest with you about how your hair looks or whether you've gained weight. Oddly, some people actually find talking to a stranger, like a hairdresser or a bartender or a coffee barista, about personal issues, they may feel more comfortable talking to them about personal issues that they don't want to talk to with their partners. It's because each of these relationships are very different and nuanced and have different levels of trust. So in the offline world, as I mentioned, this trust is built through engagement on a regular or long-term basis, which is much harder virtually. So you have to be really intentional in trying to build trust between people so that they collaborate. And it does take a lot of trial and error. But there are several factors that you want to focus on when you're trying to establish long-term participation and engagement. And the first, and I think most important, is identity. So different levels of anonymity online create different types of trust. So you really want to choose the type of online identity you're going to have your community use based on what you require your audience to do and what you're trying to achieve. So for example, if you're trying to create a virtual support group for victims of domestic violence or abuse, they may not feel comfortable sharing who they are. Similarly, for those of you who are working with human rights defenders, they may not feel comfortable sharing exactly who they are, but they may feel comfortable letting you know who they are and then using a pseudonym when they're participating. I use pseudonym approach and the known to a central figure approach quite frequently, because that allows you to build up, as you can see from this chart, a reputation. And then you can get to a certain point where people might be willing to meet in real life. But comparatively, if you're doing virtual events to try to promote policy reform, policymakers are generally going to want to know who they're talking to. So this is, again, why it's so important at the beginning to set your goal and your intention for this virtual event and your short and long-term goals, and then thinking about who's in your audience and what levels of protection you're going to give them so that they feel they can engage appropriately. Second, and related to this, is how public or private your virtual event is going to be. So closed groups can make people feel more in control of the information they're sharing and the relationships that they're forming, but they can also lead some people to think that the group has something to hide. So that's a balance that you have to start thinking about. You also want to be considering time. Is it a one-off activity? Or are you going to have a long period of time to facilitate trust? If you only have a one-off opportunity, you're really going to have to be embedding different types of engagement into that one event to try to inspire people to stay connected moving forward. It can be a little bit easier if you're doing it over a sustained period of time, but then you have to give people information and content that's going to keep bringing them back. And then finally, you want to start thinking about well, how are you going to allow for people to engage during your event? Are you going to allow them to have bilateral discussions in the chat? Or are they only going to be allowed to talk to the host? This might be, something that you do in the first instance if you're working with people who are very nervous about their security. Are you going to allow for public posts or public comments, or are you going to break people into smaller groups? All of these things you need to think about when you want to think about if you want a high level of engagement. So in the next few slides, which I know I'm going through pretty quickly, but don't worry, you will be getting them, is sort of different tactics you can take for fostering engagement. So, once you've decided on the best format and platform for your culture, you really want to start thinking about what are the strategies for having them engage during that initial session or during all of those sessions. I mean, the bare minimum is that you want people paying attention to the event and not the laundry or the brief that they're writing. So these on the screen are just a few basic techniques that I've developed, mainly for training programs that are longer than 1 hour. But this approach to, breaking topics down and providing an opportunity to digest or practice or discuss really works well for any type of online event that you're doing. Normally I integrate more time for questions, but because we only have an hour, I'm going to do questions at the end. But a key hack that I've mentioned, I found, is to ask questions and have people respond in the chat and then wait until I'm uncomfortable. Because silence in remote settings feels unbearable very quickly. I then count to 10. And by the time I get to 8, usually someone has responded to the question or the comment in the chat. And I've talked a little bit before too about icebreakers. As we saw, and this is all trial and error, my poll icebreaker did not work well. It did not break the ice. That polar bear is still safe on his large sampan because only 2 people answered my poll. But these here are on the screen are a couple of other examples of icebreakers that you might want to consider in a virtual setting if you want people to start engaging with one another. You really do need to think, though, about how funny or light you want these icebreakers to be if the content that you're going to be covering in your session is relatively heavy. But sort of one nice thing I do like about virtual events is if you've gone to a meeting and, sometimes the introductions of people can take up half the meeting and then you only have half the time to talk about content. At least when you're doing a virtual event, the bare minimum could be to have people introduce themselves in the chat. And then the nice thing is if you're using some platforms, the nice thing is in any platform, people can go back in the chat and look at people's names. If you're like me, if you have a bad memory. Unfortunately, with Zoom, if you don't have access to the chat that took place before you joined. So if you miss the introductions, you're really out of luck. But that's why, you really want to look at your platforms. And for Teams, you can see the whole history of the chat. But in any event, as you can see, there are a multitude of different icebreakers you can do online that can still be very effective at starting that, building that rapport. Another thing that I really like about virtual events is that they're a great place for introverts. As I've been sort of saying all throughout this, session, I really like having multiple streams of input during a virtual event. You know, people can ask questions verbally, they can make comments privately to me or publicly on the chat, or if it's a really sensitive situation, they can send comments separate through an entirely separate platform, which, you know, then our people on the back end can post anonymously into the chat. You know, so I think that thinking about different ways that you can have people share can help you reach a variety of different types of people. So you really just want to, at this stage, go back and look at this, you know, once you've determined who your audience is, what your goal is, what level of engagement you want to have, what types of engagement activities you want to do. This is when you can then come back to this slide and look at the different platforms, see what features will work best for you, which one will be the easiest for your communities to use, and then select that platform. So again, that's what sort of all of this being intentional is about. And of course, it's, you know, one last thing I want to say, I am starting to go a little over time, is, you know, especially if you're doing longer events on complex topics, there are a lot of different ways virtually that you can gauge whether people are listening. So doing polls, questions throughout, but also a great and different ways for them to learn. People can only listen to presentations for so long, and their attention span is even shorter when it's online. So thinking about different types of activities you can do for learning and to assess learning is a really exciting thing, a really exciting component of doing virtual trainings, and virtual events, I should say, not just trainings. So the one that I really do like trying out is the, you know, internet scavenger hunts, where you have people take 5 minutes to go and find a really interesting advocacy campaign on X and then share that. It's a great way for people to be exposed to different types of advocacy initiatives or new ideas that their algorithms on their computers might hide from them. Now, as you can see, a lot of work goes into hosting virtual events. And so the next few slides are really just a series of checklists and resources that you can use to make it a little bit easier. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of people working on the back end. It takes a lot of time and people to coordinate a virtual event. So having a checklist of all of the sort of common roles that people need to fulfill when you're hosting a virtual event is really helpful. And you'll see that on this sheet, it's not only their name, but their mobile number, because setting up a separate back channel on a different platform is really helpful. I typically use WhatsApp, because then that way, you know, when a message coming in is related to the admin of your event and it's not getting lost in the chat. Another thing I wanted to talk about is ensuring that you have the right hardware and that it's working correctly. So you want to test and test again, as the adage goes. You want to make sure that you have a mic, like a microphone, that feeds directly into your computer's audio, especially if you're doing online sessions or having presenters remote in, because otherwise it's really difficult for them to be able to hear the people in the audience and have that level of engagement. For those of you at the June symposium, you probably noticed this in our first session with Lonnie, when the audio wasn't working and I was running around frantically trying to fix it because I knew how important having that connection was. Second, I firmly believe that when you're a presenter, like I am right now, or a coordinator of a virtual event, you need to have at least 2 screens so that you can be monitoring what's going on in the back end. You can see your notes, which is what I'm doing right now. So you have a picture there of my very early stage pandemic setup of 2 screens, where on the left you can see I have my slideshow started and my chat up so I could see if people were sending comments to me. And then on the other side, I have my notes. I have Google up and running if people want me to, if I want to share a URL that I think is really relevant. I have my back channel up there. I was using Microsoft Teams. It's a lot of work going on in the back end. I have a note up here about tutorials so that your attendees will be familiar with the platform. I had this point in there when I said before the pandemic, when most people weren't used to virtual platforms, and we were spending a lot of time of our time at the front end of our trainings, just making sure everyone knew how the features worked, knew where the poll button was, knew where the mute button was. So we just started doing these 15-minute tutorials for people, and before a training, You had to sign up for one of 6 to just participate to make sure you could get on the platform. This may be helpful if you're working with communities where this is a very new sort of system. Last but not least is you want to look at your software. So you want to review all the settings from your platforms. You want to make sure that all of the authorizations that you need for the different apps are turned on before your event goes live, because often you can't make changes on the fly. So if you want to be able to allow people to chat with everyone and to share their screen, you have to turn that authorization on in Zoom. If you want to make sure that everything is end-to-end encrypted, you need to turn that on in Zoom and most other platforms before the event goes live. So really take 1 to 2 hours to go through the platform once you've selected it to make sure you've got all the settings you want. Often you can save it as a template, but not always. So you have to do this every time. Get in the habit of checking your settings every single time. And that leads us to this last part about virtual security. This gets us back to trust. What type of identity do you want to have your users using? Are they going to use video? Sometimes video is important in establishing trust, and sometimes it makes people too fearful. What is your audience going to think? Are you going to record it so that you can make it available to people who couldn't attend because they had childcare or school or what have you? Or are people going to be too hesitant to share at the level you need them to share because they know they're being recorded? One thing you always need to be aware of, even though in my rules of engagement I said no screenshots, you cannot control people when they are watching. I have had instances in some of my closed society programs where people very early on were taking screenshots and sharing them with security. You cannot stop that. You cannot completely eradicate that risk. So that's something to think about when you're considering videos and the level of trust. You also want to think about the timings of your invitation. If it's a sensitive topic, maybe you only send the link out a few hours beforehand, which can minimize hacking. I'm going to stop, after this one, because the cheat sheets will all be available for you when you get it. But I just wanted to introduce you to a group called Frontline Defenders. They have some really great, easily accessible resources on security, comparing platforms and non-techie language. But I really like this flow chart about thinking through whether your audience needs audio or video, and if, what the pros and cons are and which platforms you should go with. Again, you're going to be getting this PPT sent to you. So if you missed it, that is okay, and it will have the URL on it. Nice little cheat sheet here of everything that you need to think about when you're hosting a virtual event. And with that, I will turn it back to you, HRLA, with 7 minutes. Sorry, it did go faster before.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Actually, it is not fast at all for me, but yeah, of course, if any participant, we will send the participant your presentation for sure. But thank you so much. The thing that we learned today. Oh, any question? Do you guys have any question? Okay. If there is no questions, so maybe I go to Kun Jum. Maybe she want to say something. Kun Jum, you are on mute.
Yes, I would like to inform all the participants that this video will be is on the record function, and also we will post it on our website. If some of you feel reluctant, don't want us to do, please inform me directly. But if not, I will go ahead with the video and also the presentation. As Dick said, we will send it directly to you, including the registration link for the next coming events.
So do you have any final say, Elizabeth, just for the remark? Yeah, or maybe something that we have to pay attention.
Actually, I have one question, Elizabeth. According to your experience, what is the best virtual seminar platform that work well for you? Because we have so many.
Well, I mean, Zoom is definitely still the best in terms of user experience, but when it comes to security, it's not recommended. because when you look at where their servers are based and data localization laws that are taking place in various different jurisdictions, it's not good if you're using it for closed societies. And in fact, frontline defenders and their recommendations won't even assess Zoom for that reason. One of the factors that you want to consider is for ABA, we typically use Microsoft Teams, and that's because our entire communication system within the ABA is using the Microsoft suite. So we use not only Microsoft Teams, we use SharePoint, we use Outlook, and when you keep all your data in one ecosystem, it stays behind that entire encryption framework, and so it's much more secure. It's much more secure for me to send you a link to my SharePoint and authorize you to access that, and for us to communicate on that same sort of platform, than to go from Microsoft to Google. So staying in one ecosystem is always really good. One electronic ecosystem is, I think, really beneficial. Proton Mail is a new encrypted service that has really good usability as opposed to Tutanota or Hushmail. And Proton Mail is developing this full suite. The only thing they're missing right now is the video conference platform, which they're working on now. I hope that answers your question. I look at everything from a security standpoint, but from a usability standpoint, it's still Zoom.
Okay, thank you for your explanation. Yeah.
But I will say, actually, Meta staff use Blue Jeans, and other NGOs use Blue Jeans. And then many other small grassroots groups have started using Big Blue Button more.
Okay, maybe not relevant to the Zoom thing, but in terms of if people use the Google ecosystem and then shift to Microsoft, would it be possible? Because we have to interact with other people who currently use Google, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a little fun when, like, because my whole professional ecosystem is on Microsoft, but I can use Google on like if someone sends me a Google Meet, it doesn't interact as well with my Outlook as a Microsoft invitation, but there is functionality and you can share documents. But the thing that you have to remember is every time you're sharing a document, there is between ecosystems, there's a point when it goes out the wall of encryption behind for your system, and then has to go back in the wall for the other person's ecosystem. So there is a point when it's more vulnerable.
Okay.
I mean, you can use VPNs, but you just there's the more vulnerability when you're going between ecosystems.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And are there any comments, any questions? Wow, we are doing very perfect about timing. It's 1 hour sharp. It's 1 minute left. Well, if you don't have any question or anything, or if you think about it later on, please email us to srla2008@gmail.com. And yes, and let me know if you know somebody who can be a profiled speaker in the context relevant to digital privacy. I will get in touch with them. And also one of you, if you want to be a speaker, let me know as well. And I hope that we can see each other again in the next virtual seminar. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time and your sharing your expertise and knowledge. And I know it's really late right now for you, and you do this as a pro bono. And thank you. And thank you, Ajahn Tik, Professor Tik, and to join us in the team. And she will be helping us until, in the whole series until next year's symposium. And yes, I would like to close this seminar today, and thank you all, and have a good day and good night, Elizabeth.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you. See you.
Thank you.
สวัสดีค่ะ
Swadika. Bye.
Bye.